Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Pretty good group of everyone on today, so I appreciate everyone joining. So I guess welcome to our next Cadastral Technical Working Group meeting. We're trying to meet quarterly here, so I think the last time we met was in January. So yeah, I think we got some good content here. So hopefully we have some good discussions. I first kind of wanted to go through methodology of determining areas, either these focus or bad adjustment areas. And some of these workflows have not really been determined. So I think we are even open to new ideas. And as you'll see in the other one, the second part, kind of the submission process, probably more of the workflow that has to be determined. But just getting these areas on the map, I think is the most important part. So yeah, I'm welcome to new ideas, and obviously from the independent counties, what your workflows are, what's necessary to adjust these areas, clean them up. So yeah, I'll welcome the floor up to anyone that wants to chime in. If Mike, if you want to chime in first, maybe, since you guys are kind of maintaining your own cadastral independently.
Sure. You want to go ahead now, or do you want?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, everybody. It's Mike Snook, Missoula County. So I guess as far as looking for the bad areas of adjustment, we're really we have a day-to-day parcel fabric that we use and edit just to get our our daily use parcels out there. The accuracy is pretty bad in some areas, but pretty good in some areas. But we're using it until we finish our new one. So with our new one, we've done a ground up redraw of everything. And we started off with the original DCDB PLSS framework from long ago. That was about 8 years ago we started. And so when we're moving into new sections as we go, dropping new surveys in from the oldest to the newest, we really adjust section by section. And we do that by taking existing control points that we have from our surveyor's office and local surveyors that have given us their control. Using those, adjusting the sections to that, then subsequently adjusting the 16th corners or the quarter corners. And then from that, if we don't have enough control in there, we'll go and search through our surveys that are in that area. And if we can pick out PLSS control point corners on the surveys, we will do some COGO to COGO from our known control points all the way around the section to another known control point. So that gives us a really good basis to start with adjusting the sections, even though we don't have control points for all the corners. It's basically the same thing. So once that's done, we have a few scripts that adjust our actual control points that the fabric uses to those corners that we've adjusted. So then we have a COGO'd control point in our data. And then the good thing about that is then we can start kind of building back on those COGO'd control points. And so we can either design new sections based on the COGO that we have, or if we can meet up with some control nearby with the COGO control points, it just kind of keeps building on itself. So we have a pretty vast network at this point of control points that includes both monumented, GPS control points from surveyors and COGO control points. Let's see. I forget what our last count is, but it's covering the majority of all of the privately owned areas in our county. So that's kind of the quick overview of how we're doing it on this
end. Okay, and then Mike, I guess I do have a follow-up question on that too. Do you have any indications of distinguishing COGO issue, mostly referring to some of your historic stuff, whether it's a COGO issue or it's a PLSS control related issue?
How do we identify that?
Yeah, because
There are several areas, there's, in, if anybody's familiar with Lolo in Missoula County, there were several GCDB issues that were clearly the GCDB, a problem with the GCDB, just based on how the survey is designed, the meets and bounds of the control, or excuse me, of the PLSS lines on the surveys provide a pretty good indicator. This particular one in Lolo was about 250 feet off. So we co-goed it based on the survey and based on what the survey put on the plat, and it all fit together really, really perfectly. And it was about 250 feet off of the original GCDB. So there's a lot of pretty obvious examples like that. There are a lot of control or corner recordation forms that we use too, and we sort of make notes if surveyors have subsequently said, this point's an error, and we mark it as an error, and then keep going.
Like, your process sounds pretty similar to what I do, at least in the beginning, as far as finding the control points that you have, and then trying to go in and figure out the whole section breakdown if you from what's missing, and it's kind of, you're using everything you can, a little bit of an art form to pull all of this in and try and make it right. And I find a lot of times, I don't know about your data, but in mine, when I start to fix the section breakdown, even once you kind of readjust everything, usually all of those parcels are kind of bad and need to be redone.
Yeah.
Like,
art form is a very good description of it. It takes a lot of finesse and kind of figuring out what was intended sometimes.
Yeah.
But with our new stuff, we sort of have the luxury. We're just starting with the section at this point, so we'll try to get everything as adjusted as we possibly can before we start dropping parcels in there. That way, the next adjustment is very, very minimal, hopefully.
Yeah. It's just going back on the old stuff and get new control, and you're like, okay, I can fix this. And you look and you're like, ooh, this is going to take a little bit more work than I thought, but.
I think, Aaron, you have your hand raised.
Yeah. Good morning. Hey, Mike, do you have this process documented?
Aaron, cutting out a little bit on my end. I think I heard that. If we have this process documented, not necessarily. We just kind of have our chicken scratch notes at this point, but it's something we've been sort of just memorized over the last many years. But we can put something together.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I guess Brandy, you're on, right? I don't know if you wanted to chime in on like kind of the indications of like COGO versus PLSS control issues, because I know a lot of the other counties are not really at the luxury of Missoula County. So
yikes. Like, oh man. I don't, and Allison might be able to chime in here. I don't know if there's indications that they just, sorry, let me gather myself. I'm trying to think of variables we could look at other than having to look at each individual part, because you can't always even just use measurements like with town streets and things like that, because if sometimes those get shifted just with the adjustment process.
Yeah, I guess where I'm going at this, just so you can kind of collect your thoughts, so Brandy, I guess the reason why I bring this up is, sometimes these areas are identified, I don't really want to call out whitefish, but whitefish could be a certain, an example where these areas are identified, control is collected, the adjustments happen, and then nothing happens. I guess Deer Lodge is a good example that Michael brought up to me yesterday. And then the cartographers or the analysts in the area are kind of left to pick up the pieces to kind of redraw the area. If there's any indications that we can think of that would indicate that it's more of a COGO issue versus a PLSS issue, it does kind of alleviate the pressure of having to collect additional PLSS control when that's not even going to fix the issue.
Right.
So,
Jeff, this is Dan Staley. I logged in about 5 minutes late, so I'm kind of.
Oh, no worries. Yep. Thanks for joining us, Dan.
You bet. When you say redraw the area, what are you talking about?
I can answer that if you want. So
Yeah, go for it.
A lot of time, there are numerous areas where it's either human error or just not knowing enough or whatever it is, or conflicting surveys, which can happen too. But there are a number of areas that actually just need to be redrawn from the original surveys. They don't need to be resurveyed.
Okay, so you're talking about like that cadastral
Yeah.
land title
Yes,
lines and
yes.
not the US PLSS.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because sometimes
Like
because you don't know if it's
Gotcha.
off because the PLSS is off, and because from cadastral we draw the tax parcels to the PLSS so that when PLSS changes are made, it then gets fixed, but that
Okay.
doesn't always
Got it.
fix everything.
We have
That-
like original data that was traced from like plat books. So, and you can kind of we can look on our data and see like where that is. And, I can pretty much guarantee if it's a plat book that was digitized, it's wrong,
Yeah.
Because the people maintaining
and
the plat books,
when you're trying to tie stuff to the PLSS, it's really hard to do unless that entire section is controlled.
Right.
And most aren't, in the areas that we're talking about, and that's why it's such a process to get it controlled. I guess the only feedback I have as a land surveyor at this point in the discussion is the mathematics to put a PLSS corner back in when you don't actually physically have that control collected is always the last option. So, in our practice, that's the wrong answer. That's still likely the wrong spot if you're putting it in mathematically.
Mhm.
Your control without actually having that physical control point. And then when you're trying to adjust I'm just going to call them the cadastral layers, the private surveys, the land title surveys to anything within the section, you just need to be careful that you're COGO-ing it on the correct basis of bearing, because especially a lot of the older surveys, they're not tied to geodetic north or a state plane grid. So, and I'm sure I'm not telling you guys anything you don't already know, but I just needed to pipe in there.
Yeah.
And
There's
usually-
sorry, Allison, there's other issues too, especially on the east. The counties that I've looked at that I had, honestly, I feel like they had unpaid summer interns that were digitizing a lot of the parcels. So that kind of those issues.
Yeah, a lot of those highline towns.
Right.
Yeah. And I would also add, like when I kind of redo and redraw a section, I'm trying to find the old surveys that'll say, have the points, section corner, quarter corner, and then that also tell you where the 16th is. I don't try and mathematically figure that out. I try to figure it out using a survey, that's been, or surveys that have been filed. Because I don't like doing the math.
So Jeff, probably from just the cartographer's perspective, I mean, the answer to your question is the methodology is likely, like someone said, it's an art form. And there's likely no two cartographers within the cadastral that are doing things the same, but it sure would be nice to, you know, for the survey. I sit on the, for those that don't know me, I sit on the Milliac Council as a representative for the surveyors. Marls is what we call ourselves, the Montana Association of Registered Land Surveyors. And having a process to adjust the GIS layers, you know, for our community would be really helpful too, because then, you know, because we're actually fixing it and hopefully filing the documents that we fix it with. But when we don't quite have it nailed down, or when our project doesn't go all the way to nailing the entire section down, it sure would be nice to be able to follow the same sort of adjustments that are being followed at the state level, if that makes sense.
I'd be happy to, you know, sit down with you and go over like how I do it. It, you know, it takes a while, a lot of documents, but I could, you know, I know you're local to me.
Yeah,
And,
that'd be awesome.
Give you an idea of like how it works.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I realize I'm not a surveyor. I'm just trying to make things a little bit more accurate.
Yeah. And that's, yeah. And honestly, I mean, with a lot of the projects that we're involved in, it's these days, the USPLSS is really secondary. It doesn't control our cadastral control in a lot of areas, especially the urban areas, but, you know, out in the rest of Montana that hasn't been further surveyed, that is the control. So it just depends on what area you're working in too. But, and rarely are our deliverables on the private side of things going to make their way to you guys, but it would be really, really nice if they could. And I think there would be some benefit to taking a look at that as well.
Yeah. Michael, I think you had your hand raised there. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's okay. I've got a couple questions, but I want to follow up with what Dan just said about, Dan, can you explain a little bit more what you mean by the difference between like the PLSS control and I think you called it cadastral control?
Cadastral would just be, think of like a subdivision plat or even some of the town site plats, and private surveys that have boundary lines that aren't following the section lines or aliquot parts.
Okay, so you're just talking about basically like private surveys that are not coincident with a PLSS.
Yeah, with a section section line, right?
Okay.
Which really a lot of our modern surveys aren't. And our standards of practice is for when we file the plat or a COS used to require that we tied the nearest section corner or quarter corner into, but we're not even required to do that anymore. So a private cadastral survey that doesn't follow, you know, section lines or aliquot part lines can be completely independent of the USPLSS. And so on your guys' end of things, when you're trying to tie the two together, that makes it even harder.
Yeah, that seems problematic. Okay, I'm going to leave that one for a while because true. But from a higher level, to kind of go back to this discussion of, is it an issue with the way the parcels were originally input, whether, you know, it was some sort of scan and rubber sheeting or whatever, or just drafted, you know, based on old or inaccurate survey kind of stuff. I think one of our challenges at the library is, you know, people bring cadastral spatial accuracy issues to our attention, and we look at them and, you know, from our point of view, sure, it looks off, something looks wrong. What we struggle with is some methodology to determine whether, you know, survey control is needed to fix that, or whether all or most of it can be fixed just by, you know, redrawing that particular area, re-entering the parcels, or a mixture of both. So what we've started to do in the last little while is, as projects come up, try to work with DOR or whatever county to look at that kind of stuff and make sure that, you know, we're not throwing a bunch of money at survey control for some spot that, you know, can largely just be fixed by redrawing something, but coming up with a better way to more either objectively or repeatably do that on a larger scale, I think is one of our goals here. And I think Brandy said something like it's, you know, kind of difficult because each spot probably has its own history and challenges and issues and stuff. But if there's some sort of even high level approach that seems to make sense, I think that's, you know, one of our goals is to try to come up with something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess this is Dan again, and I don't want to talk much because again, I'm just coming at it from a surveyor's perspective. It depends on what you mean by fix. I mean, if you want the adjustment to represent anything authoritative, then it's got to be controlled. You know, but if you're just wanting to get it closer than it is, then there probably is some sort of an automated system you could put in place. I would think maybe that would include aerial photography a little bit, but I'm just brainstorming.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not suggesting, you know, we don't want control, but it's a big state. We have limited funding available and everything. Like, we're just trying to figure out a way to, like, sort of prioritize, eventually prioritize. Yeah.
I'm almost wondering if we go back to the way that it was done originally and hit all the, you know, the way to analyze it would be to start with the township corners and then go from there. You know, 6x6 grids. And chase the township corners as far as survey control. But again, I'm just thinking out loud.
So that suggestion is basically just look and for any given area and say, we're going to just try to capture get new survey control where there isn't existing stuff
at the township corners. Yeah. Collect the township corners instead of the individual section corners within the township, and then analyze it from there.
Yeah.
Okay, does anyone else have anything on this topic?
Hey, Jeff, it's Alan here with the BLM.
Yep.
I guess I kind of sort of knew this, but I'd forgotten it over the years. What Dan mentioned is that the cadastral surveys that are done in urban areas are not required anymore to tie to a section corner. I'm just curious when that history took place. And is that true of all states?
It was the Board of Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors that adjusted the rules, and they don't adjust those standards very often. I know there was a major adjustment in or amendment in 2016. But I'm thinking it happened before that. Anyway, it was some time ago. The rules were amended to not require that on a modern survey, like a certificate of survey or a subdivision plat. And at the end of the day, I mean, once we started working in real published coordinate systems, letting the USPLSS control our private surveys just became a lot less relevant.
Well, and if the BLM had done their job from day one, that wouldn't have been an issue, but I understand why it had to be left behind. But like Will mentioned there, it has created a lot of bad parcels. And so it creates another amount of work to be able to, I guess, somewhat insert a assumed section corner into those surveys so that if there is an adjustment made at that township level to the GCB, then you've got something to move that survey with, some sort of tie point or several tie points.
And I know this doesn't help with the question about the COGO issue and the PLSS control issue, but I see the day coming when we file a certificate of survey, we also list published coordinates with that for the public, and that's gonna make all of this kind of a moot point. I mean, there'll still be kind of an adjustment needed to be made when you're trying to fit two parcels together, because a lot of times you're on a local, state plane grid basis of bearing. But that'll never be solved unless we can get the whole state on a low distortion projection system, which is just mathematically impossible. But you know what I mean? The adjustments that cartographers have to make for the tax parcel map will be a lot less of an arduous process if we report our coordinates for boundary corners.
Yeah, I'm in that same camp there, Dan. I hope that day does come soon, but I'm not holding my breath at the time being. So,
I mean, I see the more counties have examining land surveyors now than in a long time. I serve as an examining land surveyor for I think 12 counties, and it's not too much of an ask to just in our closure reports, when a new survey gets filed, it's asking that they be reported on a published coordinate system. I mean, most surveyors are working on a published coordinate system anyway.
Yeah. I know the plats at MDT files.
Yeah.
They list all their coordinates on the points that they surveyed. And I mean, we acquire that data from Bill Weber, and yeah, it's really great, but sometimes it just kind of channels around your transportation corridors and doesn't really go outside of your maybe a one section buffer. But
I mean, it's not, there's no rules or law that requires that, but at a local level we certainly could ask for it, and probably this is probably getting way off topic here, so just shut me down if I'm going down a rabbit hole here. But
I'm not going to shut you down, Dan, but I would like to empower the group. I feel like that, if that's something that the group is going to see as relevant and will help promote the MSDI cadastral layer, then I would say that is definitely something that this group should tackle. This is the official group that meets under the auspices, I guess, of the council. And I would say that if this group, I would like to empower you all to do this. I think it's a great idea, and then to take it to the council and then further on up the chain in working with those different bodies such as Marls, MACO, some of the other state agencies for that matter. I just would like to say that this is that group to do that.
And then the other just last thought I have as far as how surveyors could help with this is with corner records in particular, getting back to the PLSS control, it's not much for us to put coordinates on those corner records. And it's the pushback that we've had in the past is mandating it. But if there was some sort of program to encourage it, I think we'd get some good data.
I like the idea of getting the coordinates. I think the library's gonna have, or Jeff's gonna have a hell of a job if we try to do some sort of even area adjustment. Unless do corner surveys? Do they now ask for coordinates, or is that just extra? I think we're gonna need more than just the surveys that are being done right then to adjust everything.
I don't think we're requiring coordinates be written on any corners that are collected with MLIA grants. And I would ask Dan or Wally, is that even, can we even ask that?
Oh yeah, that's I don't know if I totally understand the question, but anything grant related, that's the whole point of that's our whole job as surveyors. Involvement in that grant is to publish coordinates for that corner. If that makes sense. But on a private level, when we record something or file something at the county clerk and recorder, generally speaking, unless we're working for the state or the federal government, or we're not required to publish coordinates. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Yeah, it does.
Aaron, I think you had a question in the chat.
Oh, I apologize. I was switching modes of meeting, and I was on my phone, and I don't know if my question went through. I would basically, I was asking if earlier if Mike's process was documented or not, and I think that's probably the next steps again for the group is to start documenting our processes, and that is outlined in the strategic plan for documenting our best practices and whatnot. But also maybe this group could actually define what a bad area is, so that through that process, Jeff, it'll help us in evaluating our priority areas.
Yeah,
I mean, I think we know what it is, but I don't think it's written down officially.
Yeah, that's why I guess that kind of leads into our next topic really well, actually. And I was just talking to Brandy about it too. I mean, most of us know where these bad areas are, but I don't think we really have a good process in place of, either soliciting or submitting these bad areas to us, really. And really, just like what Aaron was saying, all this does help to identify priorities and identify areas to collect in the future for either the grant program or if some other funding is recognized or generated. So, or not really generated, but created. So yeah, I guess I'd like to go through with this, and if everyone has any comments, or Michael, are you on? You're on, right?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Do you want to kind of touch on this submission process? Because I know it's something that's kind of new that we're thinking of creating.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff was working on like a survey, and you know, I think as Aaron alluded to, in the strategic plan, it was identified that we come up with, you know, a way to, or suggested that we come up with a way to, for users to submit issues and things like that with data that comes out from the library here. So this kind of all fits in, you know, in a bigger picture with this specific thing. There's this other effort statewide to kind of come up with a better, or at least more streamlined approach for, you know, the public to interact and submit, you know, issues and questions and things to the state. That's largely being built around ServiceNow. So we just wanted to make sure that whatever we were putting in place for Cadastral kind of fit with all these larger efforts, so that, you know, we don't spin something up for Cadastral and then, you know, in a few months have to totally rework it to kind of meet the requirements or needs of all this other stuff. So that's just a long way of saying we're going to be working on some way to submit potential issues and things like that, whether it's for Cadastral or, you know, addresses or any other data that, you know, we work here at the library. But that'll be coming, and then obviously that'll feed into some sort of map that'll be publicly available, so folks can see whether, you know, a particular area has already been flagged or not, and whether it's on our radar. Does that help explain?
Yeah, it does.
I would just like to add, if anyone has seen any kind of submission tool for improving geospatial data other than the NAPE one, because I already know that one, or the web service for Esri's imagery mashup through AGOL, I'd be happy to hear about those, or send me the links. It'd be great, because we're exploring all options at this point.
Yeah, I did a bit of research on that there, Aaron, and I didn't really come across anything that captures, you know, a large amount. A lot of times it was just a link to a you know, a geoinfo box or someone's GIS box that essentially goes out to multiple people. I think I did see a couple like survey 123s, and that's kind of where I got the idea to kind of think of what I did, and kind of some help from Matt Trebish too. So, I mean, I think it would be helpful from, you know, perspectives from people that are viewing Cadastral to have it at a very simple level, but then allow for, you know, bigger pieces to be entered into the question, you know, whether they have a deed or, you know, some of their documentation to be attached. So, and I think the ServiceNow thing is fine, but I mean, it would be nice to weigh, like, you know, so it's kind of dynamically, you know, opens more questions if, you know, if yes or no was clicked. So I guess that's my only feedback on a submission process, to make it as simple as possible at the base level, but could be expanded upon.
Absolutely.
Okay, does anyone else have any feedback on the submission process, or tracking them as well? I mean, I have a very basic map that I kind of been tracking on my own, and so a lot of times these are just areas that either staff has identified over the years, or some of the DOR analysts have identified over the years as well. So, and then I kind of did move away from the PLSS reliability numbers and kind of put on this estimated error, and I'll probably have to document some sort of methodology for that, or if we create some sort of methodology of, you know, for an estimated error, but I think I just took a bunch of points and was estimating visually or whatnot. So it's by no means a concrete number, but it does kind of give you a visual representation. I know we were working on a grant in the northern parts of Stillwater that are very significantly off. I think some parts visually it looks like 500 feet. So
Just one more thought, and I know we've kind of spoken about this before and brainstormed, but I'm just thinking as why I don't submit more data unless it's grant related. And that's because we kind of forget about it, and there's no simple and clear process, you know, and so if there were a simple and clear process where we could just dump our data, and I'm talking about survey control, I think that you'd get a lot of volunteer data, but we just don't quite know who to submit that to and what that looks like. You know, it's easy for us to generate a report or a CSV out of our geomatics program, but just is that enough? You know, can we email it to one person with an attachment? So just a quick process on how to accept survey data would be helpful, or how to submit survey data.
I can work with you on that. I'd like to hear more about your ideas.
That would be my idea, is just an email address and the format that you want it in.
As Will with the Forest Service, and our surveyors kind of have the same feeling. You know, they'd be glad to submit control, but it kind of is an extra step and something that they don't think about. We've been working with them to try to populate the controls spreadsheet that you can submit to the state, but that almost is maybe a little too much. Like Dan's saying, if there was a way to drop in a standard file that you guys can export, surveyors can export easily, that might speed things up if they didn't have to populate the spreadsheet. Just a thought.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is the spreadsheet's a little cumbersome and slows down the process.
Well, and it's not bad, but it's hard to take the time to fill it out and send it in, especially when you don't know who to send it to. And honestly, for private survey jobs, we can't really charge our clients for that. So if there were just a way to send a report that we're already generating on our, you know, our geomatics software already generates, that would be really the path of least resistance, and the end result is it's got a description and it's got coordinates. So yeah. So
Wally and Dan, you guys are probably the ones that have worked most on MLA grants on the call. Do you think that one of those reports is equivalent to what's being asked of in the control spreadsheet? Is all that information found in there?
No, there's extra columns in that spreadsheet. One is just the number itself, what you call the point, the naming of the point.
Okay.
And then there's I think there's, Wally, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's a couple of different coordinates reported, maybe lat long and state plane. And then, but that doesn't mean we couldn't customize a report from our program to, you know, to give you exactly what you need. That spreadsheet is a carryover from the you know, from back when and Alan might know the history there, but it was developed by the BLM back when they made the adjustments. I think we're still using the same spreadsheet.
I like that idea, Dan, of creating a custom report that could meet our needs. I would just have to double check with staff, particularly Bob Holliday, who's, that's his theme, to see if that would, if we could, if we could do that, because we certainly could build a process that could, look at those reports and pull it into whatever database we need.
Yeah, just here's the format and here's the information we need
Okay.
to do the adjustment, and here's who you can send it to or how you can submit it. And that way I can paste that on my wall, because I mean, in the course of a year, Wally's probably in the same boat here, because they do a lot of public survey work as well. We probably collect, upwards of 100 and 150 a year all around the state, and probably 3/4 of those slip through the cracks and don't go anywhere beyond our internal files here as far as the data goes.
Yeah, I think the key for surveyors and collecting data from surveyors is keeping it simple for them, because I think Dan mentioned earlier, it's not a cost they put in typically into their projects, is sharing that data. So if the format could be something to where either Trimble Business Center is a program often used, or Leica is another one where they can just generate a report, hit the button, generate the report, and send it to the library and make it real simple for them and easy to share the data. Those two could be linked up somehow.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
great. This is wonderful.
Is there anything, oh, this is Aaron from City Great Falls. Is there anything in regards to prompting like county clerks to do any of these submission processes, or involving them at all?
Well, if they're being, I think it's something to discuss. If it's, I think you, as a city employee, you could certainly make suggestions that any surveys spent with, city dollars meet a certain requirement. If they don't already, and with, reporting that, maybe it could be a process where you ask them to submit it to you, Aaron, or they just submit it directly to the state library. That would be an awesome process to put in
Yeah, I
place.
thought it'd be useful for them, because they'd have a repository that they may be able to actually quickly reference to the state library. But I don't know what that would look like.
I think what Aaron's a little reluctant to say is that we don't want to create work for those clerks, and we certainly don't want to be seen as doing that. But if that's something internally that makes sense in your local government, then we'd certainly encourage you to pursue whatever the most efficient workflow would be.
That's cool. No, I didn't know. I just didn't know what capacity maybe they were involved, if at all. So no, that does.
Well,
yeah.
Aaron, you'll soon know at the end of this grant, or you might have already started the process of gathering those records. So you might have new ideas that come to you when we say, all right, Aaron, now go find all these records for us.
Yep. No, I get it. Totally.
Yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah. And if you do that and you're successful, we'd love to hear that story and share it with everyone else.
I know at DOR we've talked about starting to work with the clerk and recorders more. I know that some individually have talked to individual ones, but because we don't get everything, they send the stuff that actually deals with properties. So for example, unless we directly ask for it and that person remembers, like we don't get the MDT right away surveys, for example. Which now we can get in the control points, but there's lots of things like that where we gets nothing about it. We don't know what's happening. So I guess if there's something at the clerk recorders level, maybe this exists, where if they get a corner recordation survey, do they notice in that to the library automatically?
Not yet. That's what Aaron's going to work on.
And
Or
again,
even if it goes to local property, and then the GIS analyst at that county, or for PAD, they could push it on from there.
But a lot of time those corner recommendations still don't have any coordinates. So
Yeah, and you know, really, I think it's a great question, but I think I just having worked for so many clerk and recorders and currently working, you know, on contract for several counties, I can tell you that I completely agree that they don't want to do any extra duties that are beyond their expertise and scope. So when you get into technical things, short of helping you pull records, you know, I just don't think it's a fair ask of them or their staff. But the good news is a lot of counties have examining land surveyors that can totally help with this. And if whatever data is needed, such as coordinates on certified corner records or coordinates on a plat or a certificate of survey is helpful, that's definitely something that could be worked into an examining land surveyor's technical review and submission to the state. I just don't think that would be too big of an ask, but asking the clerk and recorders to be a part of it, I think is a little bigger of an ask.
I think the only part we were thinking of is just pass it along with all the rest of the deeds and surveys that they give to PAD.
Yeah, maybe deeds if they're not already passing along deeds.
yeah, and you know, I still, even in my best counties that I'm sure are sending everything over, I still go online. And I know that this is harder in the small counties where you can't just go online and look, but I still go looking for work because there's been plenty of times actually when we haven't gotten things that we should have, and who knows where they got lost, but you know, there's subdivisions haven't shown up, and so yeah, you know, I think that's also is kind of part of our workflow, is to sort of look for what did we miss, what did they forget to send us, what did the new person not know that they were supposed to stick in this pile, kind of thing.
Wally sent out some great information through email, in case you guys don't have your email up at the same time.
Yeah.
I got it.
Wally.
Thank you, Wally.
Yeah.
Yeah, you bet. I guess I just fired another one off too. I mean, the survey community is going through a pretty big change over the last few years and moving forward into the next 4 or 5 years. I'd bet, and I don't, Dan, maybe you'll disagree with me, but I bet 90% of our community after the new state plane coordinate systems come out, that if the ones that have adopted those will be using it. And it's not because it's easy to share the data, it's just those local coordinate systems that are embedded, it's embedded in their survey equipment, and it's just a lot simpler to use. So they'll be collecting data. I think the hurdle to get over is how to get that information from the surveyors to the GIS community to update the system. 10 years ago, we weren't really collecting things in a unit. Hit a here command on our stuff there, and each person had their own coordinate system.
I mean, we're still required to describe our basis of bearing. So, you know, you can figure it out even if you're not on if you're on a local grid coordinate system. But yeah, it's just because of the published coordinate systems being better and better, and especially what like Wally sent here, the LDPs are actually, you can measure them on the ground, and they'll, you know, those are low distortion projections. Anyway, but with the advance of coordinate systems, I just think this is going to be, given enough time, the adjustment is going to be less and less of a big deal. Especially if we can, encourage the volunteer submission of coordinates for survey control.
Well, if we have a process in place that makes it easy, and then we communicate that process and give something for Dan to stick on his wall, then
Well,
then
and
we might see
let me
more
just-
of it.
And let me just clarify, I'm pretty involved in our professional organization. So my goal would be to send out a mass, I don't know, education pamphlet, that, hey, the state's making progress on nailing down the USPLSS control, and here's how you can help. And I think we might be surprised at how many people just make it part of their workflow within the survey community.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the private surveyor I talked to basically said, it benefits him to put his data in the PLSS and in Cadastral and all of that, but he does not have, he just wants to hit a button and hit send and be done with it.
Yeah, keep it simple and keep it really clear and simple, one point of contact type deal or one process. And the other thing that's going on here is when the cadastral was first developed, I think the state felt a lot of pushback from the survey community, and that was back when our data was held pretty closely to our chests, and that because of a lot of variables, that's a lot. The next generation of surveyors are more free with their data.
Jeremy or Mike, I guess from an independent county standpoint, what's your guys' relationships with the surveyors in those communities, and I guess their willingness to kind of share some of the information to kind of clean up your guys' parcels?
From the Butte Silverbow standpoint, up until really the last year or so, the relationship has been touch and go. Some were a little more cooperative than others. Most of our submitted plans were a variation of actual survey documents, things that were fairly reliably recorded, something that we could actually enter into our system. Most were not. Since Dan Janosko has started here as a liaison with Public Works, we pushed for that more directly. We insist upon it or require it or close to for any new builds. Beyond that, it's still sparse. We actually, for a long time, were attempting to hire a surveyor that would be either partially or fully under Butte Silverbow, employee of ours in our land records department. That likely is not going to happen at this point, but that's where we're sitting for now anyway.
Mm-hmm.
One thing Jeremy said there that kind of sparked my memory, and we talked about Deer Lodge a little while ago, but their design standards, so on new builds, their design standards actually require that the plans be submitted in a published coordinate system.
That is excellent to hear. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that can be worked into any community's design standards. Now that doesn't fix the historic record problem, but moving forward, it certainly is something that communities can make part of their standards.
Absolutely. We've had actually a pretty significant amount of positive buy-in to that. Most of the time when these projects go down, they have those documents already available to them. we've just simply never asked in the past beyond voluntarily submitting these documents on behalf of whatever developer it is. So yes, I agree. For new builds, that's a great method.
I guess speaking of county surveyors, Mike, I know you guys have one on retainer. I guess maybe explain that process or explain the benefits from your guys' standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a benefit to have that resource. He's 2 offices down for me, so it comes in handy. Steve Knight, if anybody knows Steve, he's incredibly helpful with if we need some control out there, he's definitely willing to put that on his agenda to go out and get it. But they do a lot of campaigns. The latest one, well, a couple of years ago now, was to GPS all the intersection monuments that we have in the city, which really helped our accuracy in the city. But it's huge. It's huge to have a good working relationship in that respect. Private surveyors, I do ask a lot. They're always more than willing to give me the control. What I find is it's sort of an extra thing that they have that is now on their plate. So it tends to go that I have to keep reminding them and bugging them sometimes, but they're always more than willing to help out. So that's good. And the lines between surveying and GIS, it helps to make it understood that those lines when dealing with them. It seems to help out a lot. So make friends with your local surveyors.
Yeah, if Ken Miller was on, he'd probably say the same exact thing. I know he's had a complete buy-in down Ravalli County, and
Yeah.
some of his apps, if some of you have not checked them out, they're pretty cool. He's kind of got custom apps, kind of even target related to his audience. And that, I know when we were doing the Ravalli adjustment, then we incorporate his control. Yeah, I was on his web services all the time, so some very good documents being linked as well. So it's very, very helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the other thing I just have to share, internally, we've been capturing all our survey control through our Esri software. So we've got some history there too of just having it already input into a system. And as that relates to public entities that don't have staff like Steve Knight or Butte Silver Bowl, has a great program, but a lot of these smaller counties just don't have the funding for that. And but they are starting to subcontract out to folks like examining land surveyors that can help with the submission of data.
If there was that, the easy button, quote unquote easy button, like somebody chatted there, I think that would be a huge step in getting control easier from private surveyors. So whatever can be done would be great.
Not to completely change the subject, but back to the submission and map that would show areas. There are known areas that where they've been researched and nothing can be done at the unless new surveys are done, where we've got overlapping surveys, things like that. I think it would be helpful if we had some kind of, even if it's not public, just like almost not data dump, but where you'd be like, okay, yeah, we know about this area. The research has been done. Like I know Guy's got lots of areas. I know Allison's got some of those where it's, we have the surveys and we can't, there's it just can't be done. There's no way to fit the pieces together in a better way, I guess. So having those areas identified or marked off in some way, and maybe eventually for the public, like, hey, if you want this area corrected, you need to call your surveyor. I don't know.
So very good point. That, yeah, that's kind of, I guess maybe what I think what I was getting at earlier. So what you're saying is like, you guys have looked at it and like, there's no way to fix anything without new survey control.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's more of a smaller private land. I know there's Allison or Maureen, you even know about this. I think some of the areas around, I don't know, there's some around some waterway or something where it's a lot of subdivisions, but they overlap. The surveys done at different times, they overlap, and there's not even having all the old surveys and the research. Something else would have to be done, or a law passed or something to figure out how to resolve it, or new surveys.
Yeah, all the stuff that's above our pay grade. We tell people get it surveyed.
Like where it's, we can recogo it. It's not going to change anything. Like, the controls fine in that area, but it's not the surveys. It just doesn't work.
A few of the things that I've ran into, I'm not as familiar on the waterways. That would be more of an Allison thing. But what we've run into is, sometimes the clerk and recorder ends up not accepting a map, and they've never let us know. And so another surveyor has actually used that as a reference. So now we've got points in 4 different places. That's some of the problems we're running into.
So Brandy, just to follow up on and make sure I'm clear.
Yep.
Like, you're talking about like possibly just private land surveys. Like, there's enough PLSS control, but once you get off the PLSS into away from stuff, there's just conflicting or not enough new survey control to clean up something. Is that what you mean?
Basically, it may not always be private. I mean, as I'm sure Alan can attest to, there's lots of information where, we get great BLM surveys, and, they're only surveying federal land. And so then let's say the river's moved and we know that this private land's had chunks taken out of it, but we can't do anything about it. And they probably don't want to get it resurveyed. So we end up with overlapping, sometimes we'll end up with overlapping government tracts or government lots with private land on the other side of the river, for example. But other times it is kind of like what Maureen said, like the references or the basis of bearings will be on a survey that we don't have or wasn't given, or maybe wasn't. This isn't new stuff. This is older stuff, or it wasn't the best survey to do a basis of bearing with type thing. So there's just no way, there's nothing that we can, or we feel like we can do keeping it legal, I guess. Like, none of the GIS art makes it fit.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think that's like what we're trying to, where possible, capture. So we understand as much as possible what the issue is and what's needed to actually fix it.
Yeah, and getting people's information before they retire or leave or go elsewhere, because there's just a lot of knowledge out there that all you guys have that, it's not really thought of. But if we can combine all that, I think it would be amazing.
Brandy, how do those requests come to you? Like, what's the process there?
Which,
Well, like to examine something like that, is it's a private citizen reaches out, or?
sometimes, I mean, you guys probably get a lot of them. It's more of the, I mean, some of them are, yeah, the imagery doesn't match type of thing. And that's where that comes from. I think others in some of the areas just know that it's that like the cadastral just isn't accurate for where they are because the surveys don't work, right? Or don't match up.
Do you think it would be beneficial that, you know, these requests come in and, you know, someone wants us to look at something like the imagery doesn't match up. You guys start this process. You go through this whole long process of exploring it. Do you document it and post that somewhere? I'm wondering, like, so that if someone does want to look it up, that they can. Like, let's say Allison's gone through this process. She gets a job next year working for Esri, and then someone is from DOR goes through the same process again, or MSL or someone local has the same question again when the land changes hands. Do you think that that would be beneficial, or to some way acknowledge that it has been researched? And then, you know, how would you properly document that so you're giving enough information but not going down like a rabbit hole?
I've been thinking like this whole kind of conversation about, you know, how we identify and find and kind of communicate with each other on these, that it would be, you know, helpful to have a map where we could say like, this is, you know, this is where the issue, you know, we have issues, this is what they are, maybe some basic documentation, basic write-up of maybe what the issue is, so that, yeah, it could be accessed later on by other folks. You know, right now, a lot of my files just sort of live on my desktop. In the past, they lived in my desk drawer. Like, I still have a whole bunch of, you know, this is this correction from 15 years ago. And, you know, folders with just geocodes. And sure, it'll be passed on. If I left and got a job with Esri, I could pass it to Maureen, but that still doesn't help. Say, if you're thinking like, huh, this area looks kind of funny, I'd like to fix it. You know, or somebody else comes along.
Right, because I've been with the library long enough, and you know, I did cadastral adjustments, cadastral updates for like 10 years. So, you know, and I was just like, okay, that was like, who was the cartographer at the time? I remember hearing about this, but lately there's a lot of stuff that's in my brain. It's just not floating to the surface, you know? And so to document that, because that's another thing, is just like, just when people retire, like, you know, let's say, Allison, you're going to retire. We already know we had a bunch of people retire. It's just like, okay, and where do we find that information? But I think that it would be really beneficial to the cadastral community to see that, and then for us to prove to our citizens and our partners and collaborators and stakeholders that we've been, you know, we've thoroughly researched this and we've taken it to the point where we can fix something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt that same way when Pat Halcrow retired and I took his position up in Great Falls. Like, there was just so much like undocumented or like, you know, knowledge that Pat had that, you know, if I hunt and find and, you know, like, or even ask him in some particular cases, you know, he'd go through a whole conversation of something like that. But yeah, it'd be cool to have, you know, a map, you know, particularly where there's discrepancies and, you know, conflict areas are described.
Yeah, even just so it's identified, like, hey, we've looked into this area. It's, you know, we're not ignoring it.
Yeah. I mean, like, for instance, I'll use the legal description between Park County and Sweetgrass County.
Right, that's still off.
Wrong. Yeah, is wrong. And so, like, there's all this stuff on the Boulder River, and it's in a mining claim, and we don't know which county it's in. And
Are you talking about the legal descriptions that are in the Constitution?
Yep.
I think there's more than one county that are incorrect.
Well, I know, but this is the only one I know of for sure. Like, because I had Guy look at it years ago, and it's like, okay, yeah, there's nothing we can do about that. Like, that's up to the legislature, whoever, to fix. And, you know, So like, yeah, we're aware, nothing we can do. So that would be nice. And, you know, and so then legislate, you know, if you need to go to the legislature or something like that, and you have a whole list of places where this is wrong, you can be like, all right, this is stuff we need to work on.
Yeah, so we don't really have any sort of process right now. And mainly that's been because there really hasn't been any, until recently, we haven't worked necessarily even as a GIS group together. And so I've been definitely trying to change that in DOR. I would say that I would think that most analysts are probably, we have lots of annotation layers that we use, and we document things in those annotation layers that aren't passed anywhere else. But I've trained the last 3 analysts to make sure you're keeping up with that annotation layer with, you know, the deed, at least the deeds, the COS numbers and things like that, just so we have a history of where it is. And that's another thing with going to a parcel fabric that I think will be beneficial to have a history. But for now, yeah, just being able to identify the areas somewhere. I mean, almost like how with the LiDAR, how you can say, hey, yeah, this is the area I'm interested in. I mean, it doesn't have to be the same kind of map for the submission. It could just be something, you know, AGOL web map, and that we all have access to, that we could say, yeah, this is this, and you know, a couple annotation, a couple attribute fields that can take, you know, lots of text.
Yeah, and I think that this is I think this group and this conversation is headed in the right direction, and I think that this could be part of the planning process. It was a goal of Jenny and the council to start developing plans for each spatial data infrastructure layer, and then have those adopted by the council. And so I think that, you know, this reporting tool could be something that we work towards developing an easier process for reporting any kind of MSDI issue, and the easy button to submit survey information. I think this is great. Jeff, you have a lot of good stuff.
One more, just to dovetail on Aaron's comment there. I can see an overall accessible map like that really encouraging folks to apply for MILIAC grants too.
Yep. And if there's a funding request, I mean, if there's something specific that needs to happen, it needs to be identified through the planning process and then through the land information plan development process, and make sure, you know, we're aligning all of our plans together, but that, you know, that could be something that this working group could bring to the council.
Okay, does anyone else have any thoughts on that? Yeah, this is some pretty good discussions. So I appreciate everyone being here and participating too. So. Yeah, I'm not sure if we have really much time to get into anything else. I think this was a overall very productive meeting though. Our next meeting is July 20th, same time, same place. So yeah, if anyone has any new topics, feel free to email me. But yeah, I think this is good. We'll just continue these every quarter, and yeah. If anyone has any closing thoughts, just let me know. But
Yeah, thanks for everyone's input. Like I think Aaron said, we've got a good list of things to try to start tackling.
Okay, I will let you guys be on your way, and I guess have a great rest of the week. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yep. Thanks,
Good job.
everyone.